So thank you everybody for coming today. We'd like to especially thank Rob for being out for flying down here to see our presentation. Today we're going to talk about Jsats, which is the Juvenile Salmon Acoustic Telemetry System. Nathan's had to give somebody $100 if they can say that 3 times fast after the presentation. So our system was commissioned by the Army Corps of Engineers in 2001. What it does is it tracks salmon down the Columbia River to the Pacific Ocean. More specifically, it tracks the survival rate of these salmon through the multiple dams along the Columbia River. There are 2 parts to our system. One is the acoustic transmitter, and the other is a hydrophone. Now, P&L doesn't make the hydrophones, but they do make the transmitters. The transmitter consists of a 3-volt battery, a microchip, and an acoustic transducer. And what it does is basically they take this, it's about the size of a grain of rice, and they put it into an 8-gauge needle, and then they inject it into the bottom of the salmon. This is easier than previous methods because they were pulling the fish out, cutting them open, putting transmitters in, having them sew back up, and releasing them into the water. This caused a lot of shock for the fish, which increased the mortality rate. By making the device injectable, it decreased the mortality rate and increased the process speed, which they can inject the fish. The transmitter itself sends out pings, acoustic pings, to the hydrophone. So every 5 seconds, it'll send out an 8-digit code, which is picked up by the hydrophone, and this can be adjusted to 10 seconds or 1 second, whatever you feel like. But currently at 5 seconds, the battery life for the transmitter will be approximately 60 days. But that can be adjusted as well, depending on how often those frequencies or the pings are sent out. The range for the transmitter is around 300 meters, and that can be changed as well, depending on the signal frequency, so the intensity of the frequency that's sent out. If you increase or decrease it, you can increase the range or decrease the range. But Daniel, the inventor, says that it'll never go past 500 meters no matter what you do to it because of the size of the acoustic transducer. As far as patent goes, none of the individual components of the transmitter are patentable, but the device as a whole does have a patent pending from P&L. To talk about some future applications and some markets that we explore in the summer is Jenny Palm.
So when we first got our device, we weren't quite sure where the value proposition lied. Was it in the transmitter itself, or was it in the battery? So at the very beginning of the summer, we focused primarily on the battery because it is cylindrical in shape and the smallest on the market. So we looked into seeing if we could implement this for sunglasses or motorcycle helmet lens tinting using LCD, and also investigating into personal healthcare devices. Once we figured that the battery cannot be patented by itself, then we kind of shifted away to go back to the original value proposition of tracking. So we looked both in water and on land and air, looking to see if this device could be used as a modified or improved avalanche beacon, or on a hiker who's lost in the woods, or even tracking your children. So then we realized that we wanted to go back to that original proposition of the acoustic telemetry system, which necessitated an aquatic environment. So we looked into seeing if this device would help us detect oil spills or pollution within water, or also dam construction, since they already have that idea with the salmon going through the dams, or possibly scuba divers. After our P&L visit, we went up there and talked with Daniel, who's the head engineer, and also the commercialization manager. We decided to stick with conservation, strictly because that is an avenue that they already are investigating, and we felt that that would be a logical jump going from fish and water into some other areas. So with this device, there are some very specific limitations that we had to keep in mind. First is that due to the acoustic technology, it functions best in an aquatic environment. And also the size, because like I said, it's about the size of a grain of rice. The battery life and the receiver range were very limited, and we wanted to make sure that those could be maximized in order to spread the potential usage. There's also some hybrid potential that Daniel had implied, that we could modify this device how we see fit, and that's potential there, although a lot of those are untested. Another thing with that aquatic environment, before I forget, It needs to be aquatic, but it also needs to be a contained environment, a lake, a river, as opposed to open water because of our limited range. So, like I said, we focused on conservation. We did the acoustic, looking into different types of fish, since they already have that going. We didn't want to spend a lot of our time going into that area. We also looked at land and air with radio and GPS, since that is the preferred tracking method for the terrestrial tracking. So we looked into birds of prey and eagles and migratory waterfowl, as well as snakes and bats and dogs. And we also looked into how we would implement a hybrid potential. So looked at turtles, amphibians, and penguins to see how this would be able to be implemented. And now Derek is going to talk about some of our specific areas of research we focused on.
So after speaking with P&L and discovering that they were currently pursuing this products using salmon, sturgeon, lamprey, and eel, we chose to pursue an avenue that was in line with that, but just in a different kind of market, so that we could keep the product using the existing imagery without actually having to make any alterations. We thought of the Southwest. They have a lot of water scarcity and water rights issues that lead to conservation in a lot of different fish types. We contacted conservatories in Arizona and New Mexico regarding their current practices and found out that they use a passive tracking tag, a PIT device, which doesn't typically use a battery, and is detected by receivers once the fish reach a desired area, alerts researchers that it's reached this area, and that's pretty much all that they really need it for. They have no specific need for real-time tracking in this application. And also, the fish tend to be minnows, and they don't really grow much larger in these areas. Those that need to be tracked. And so the injectability of our device actually heightened the mortality rate for these fish. This really was not a viable option without making alterations. In line with that, we also pursued checking into a hybrid device using acoustic telemetry when a sea turtle hatchling was underwater and radio frequency once it reached the surface. We hypothesized that these hatchlings stayed nearby in shallow waters soon after hatching, which would allow for real-time short-term tracking with capabilities within the range of our product. After research, we found out that the hatchlings actually traveled great distances through underwater currents upon hatching. These distances were far beyond the capabilities of our product. If there were to be a contained area that some kind of reptile or amphibian stayed in, this hybrid model could be a good potential future option, but as of right now, there's too many alterations that would need to be made for this application. We also looked into bald eagle and large bird of prey tracking. Current practices with this use a large backpack-like GPS device, which records data and activity for 3 to 5 years before being retrieved and recorded by researchers. Again, there was no real need for real-time tracking in this application, especially none that would be competitive with the GPS capability for both distance and longevity of tracking. This, again, could be a potential option in the future if radio frequency capabilities were added, but anytime that these capabilities require the device to be larger, we lose value proposition. Overall, we ran into very similar challenges throughout all of our conservation research. Primarily the lack of availability for a point of contact. Many of these people are field researchers who, some of them are even abroad. We spoke with a person who was in the field in Africa when we were trying to get a hold of them. And they're really not available through phone or email consistently enough to get enough information out of them to make a study. And they also don't always know if they could hypothetically use a product that they've never actually seen in action before. Also, these projects present very specific needs, which would almost always require some sort of alteration to our project, to our product, which again, once it increases in size, is no longer that unique and introduces us into markets which currently already have a lot of competition. And additionally, working with conservation, you're typically working with a government agency or a university, which presents issues of both profitable pricing and longevity. These entities require very competitive pricing in order to establish a contract, and they're also typically short-term field research projects which could render our products obsolete at the end of that for their purposes. So realizing that conservation was really not going to be a right now sort of opportunity for us to put this product in the market, we began backtracking and looking at ideas that we had explored in the beginning but quickly pushed aside in favor of the conservation. And we came up with one idea in particular that would allow us to keep the product exactly as it is, put it in a contained environment, and Charlie's going to talk to you a little bit about that idea.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Derek. So what we found is scuba diving was actually our best market for actually applying this juvenile acoustic transmitter. So what we'd be doing is putting this in the scuba environment to put it underwater to track instantaneously scuba divers when they're actually in the water. So because scuba divers' regulations are supposed to stay within 100 to 200 feet of the boat, it's a perfect contained environment for our device. And because it's based in the water, the acoustic signals will also be traveling within the limited distance that our device can actually receive and transduce the signal. So the actual scuba diving market, there's about 120 million scuba divers worldwide right now. But in 2012, there's 3 million scuba divers in the United States that actually got in the water to swim. So just looking at the United States market alone, we're looking at a $420 million market for our device for this instantaneous tracking. And it's something that's not really being done. So when there's 100 to 200 deaths each year, this is sort of where we see our value proposition, where we have a device that's streamlined, it's able to provide instantaneous tracking, and can also help save those lives. So right now, if we're going to travel the journey of if you're a scuba diver and what you'd be doing, when you get suited up and you're in the boat and you start going into the water, the boat operator is going to be looking for those bubbles when they rise to the surface. That's supposed to tell them exactly where you are in the water, maybe where you're traveling, a little bit of approximation, but that's what they're using. The bad part about that is that if those bubbles are rising to the surface, anything in the water, sea conditions, wind, if they're exploring a cave or a sunken ship, all those bubbles are only way to detect where you're at, are going to get distorted and not give them a good point of contact to where you are in the water. Now, if you're actually in the water, the dive masters are using line of sight, a buddy system. There might be some wireless communication, but there's no active signal that's being sent out for these type of devices. There are some emergency devices that are sending out a GPS signal or sending out an RF frequency, or there's something called a radar sausage, where basically in a time of emergency, either you're running out of air or you're trapped. You have to take a device off your belt, attach it again to a string, and then inflate it with an alternate air source and have it rise to the surface to hopefully get picked up by a ship's radar. And this is all in that time of emergency. So what we designed is a system that allows instantaneous tracking that also is streamlined and low profile for this already expensive scuba diving market, and that's our Scuba Link system. So as you see here, this is the same device that's put in the salmon right now and is already mass produced. The price point has already been brought down to $1 to $2 per device. We're going to be adding an actual water-resistant adhesive that will slap onto the inside of our scuba diver's wrist before they go in the water. Each of these devices has a unique user ID to provide their tracking location in the water. Also right now, 5 seconds is how often that ping rate is. We can set that 1 to 5 to 10, however we want to do that, but that's sort of how the device is currently envisioned for our Scuba Link system. Now it also tracks temperature, but how we're going to use that we'll show you right here. Now this is the actual process of how we would implement our system. So what would happen is as the scuba divers are going in the water, they put these individual IDs on the inside of their wrist. Those will then start transmitting that user ID out to our data center. We'll have a system of hydrophones, which is going to be triangulating their position while they're in the water. That position is then going to go to our data center, which will go up not only to the boat operator, but also to the parent company for in case of emergency to see where they were at in that location before something went wrong. Insurance companies might want to know this. Government agencies, when you're in protected waters, want to know how scuba divers are actually performing in these coral reefs, how they're actually doing it. So this is where our device is actually giving a good value proposition for what's currently on the market. When the divers are going in the water, the boat operator is able to actually track them within seconds of where they actually were at. So now this is our proposed application of what our boat operator would be seeing. As you see here, these are 2 different scuba divers. They put these on their wrists, they've entered the water, and every second, this information is going out to our system of hydrophones and back to the boat. So each Scuba Link system has an individual ID, so you can track each individual diver, and then that's going back to the boat to track their location. Hopefully future applications to have something to increase the signal or notify if the heart rate increases, to give a notification to that boat operator that something wrong is happening, and if not, at least where their scuba divers are at. Are they going outside that 200 feet regulation range from the boat? Are they going off away from their buddy? Is something going wrong? This is something they don't really know at the moment, but this is something we can give them with our system. So we're going to turn it now over to Dane, who's going to talk about our commercialization and our business strategy.
Thank you, Charlie. Yeah, we've come up with 3 different potential models that we would like to pursue with this transmitter. Our first one is the razor blade model. Under this model, we're going to subsidize heavily the hydrophones that are required for each dive company. And then we're going to make up our money by selling the transmitters at a big markup, roughly 500%, so that'd be $5 to $7 each. And this, we think we could cover or make up the subsidy pretty quickly, selling a lot of transmitters to each dive company. And in this model, we could reach a lot of customers. The subscription model is that we would go out to popular dive spots around the US and around the world and place hydrophones. We would also maintain these hydrophones. And then since multiple dive companies go to each spot normally, they could all subscribe to use these hydrophones. This, we would collect data from the hydrophones, and that's how we would determine the monthly fee that each company would pay us. This is a really easy adaptation and allows the most divers to use our system. The third model is our social application model. It kind of is the Nike Plus of scuba diving. It piggybacks off the second model, the subscription model, but it adds the social media app, which allows individual divers to utilize Facebook and Twitter to share their dives with fellow adventurers, family, friends. And the cost of doing this would just be added on to the service that we charge dive companies or a flat fee for individuals. Right now, our recommendation is to follow the subscription-based fee. It doesn't, we don't have to deal with the application yet, and it gets us to the most divers right now. Are there any questions? Someone's got to have a question.
What's the cost of the hydrophone?
The minimal cost right now is around $4,000 for one, and they can go upwards of 2,000, 20,000, sorry, 20,000 and higher, depending on what you want from the hydrophone. That's why in that second business model, we would probably purchase a subsidized account because no company can afford up front the cost of a really nice hydrophone.
And that's the cost for the hydrophones that K&L is currently using. You also can go much cheaper, but they aren't going to provide you the quality or the accuracy that the higher grade ones will.
So it won't work to have a couple of hydrophones on the boat? They've got to be placed on fixed positions in popular areas?
No, so it will. The first business model is actually we giving the hydrophones, subsidizing the hydrophones to the boats, and they will put these wherever they feel necessary. And the second one's where we own the hydrophones and put them in popular dive boats. But yes, we would give them to the boats and the excursion owners first. That's an individual boat. Each individual boat has their own hydrophones under that model. And then the other two business models, multiple boats can use the same hydrophones.
Okay, so you chose one of the latter, so what is the minimum number of hydrophones you have to place and what location and what total capital cost is that going to be?
So you can have one hydrophone and still get good tracking data, but it's almost like a GPS. If you have the more hydrophones you have, the bigger the network you have, the more accurate the data will be. So I don't know if you want to expand on that chart.
No, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I think, so basically, if we're going to just put one on a boat, it'd be the $4,000 capital cost, but if we're actually going to set up the system, then obviously people who are using, we want to give them the best experience, so wherever they're going in the Blue Lagoon, we're able to actually track them.
Okay, so you said system, so how many are you going to have to buy?
It depends. I mean, to effectively give a three-dimensional, you have to have at least 3, but depending on where we're placing them, we can have 3, 4, 5, 6, 10.
It'd be location dependent, so
Okay.
if we're at the Blue
The
Lagoon,
system will work.
Okay, all right, I don't want to monopolize the discussion, so it seems like a diver can handle something bigger than a grain of rice that might have a greater range, is that what you're thinking?
well, yeah, so I guess the problem with devices right now is $250, they can get this big bulky GPS location device. But that's something where, in the time of emergency, they have to activate it. So what we're proposing is something that is on the streamlined positioning on the inside of the wrist to give the data of the scuba diver to be able to find them in an emergency situation, give their tracking information when they're in the water, and something that's this actual, when you're going in the water, it's $1,300, $1,400 for just the equipment alone. So it's already cost prohibitive to not even have these safety measures in place. That's just to go and enjoy the sport. So we're actually providing a safety measure that we're hoping that the customers will then be buying into.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Did you look at how many dive spots in the world or in the country might be sort of, full enough or busy enough to make a system like that work?
Yeah, we did look at different potential dive spots. The thing that's going to be even the bigger question beyond that is actually working with the government agencies to put these in place. So that's where we hope that by actually doing the second model where we're doing that ourselves, is the scuba diving companies might not be able to get the permits or the leases to put these out there. But hopefully when we work with the United States government or with a different government, we'll be able to actually set those systems in place so when we go to this particular dive spot, such as the new marine sanctuary that Obama just created, it would be something where we'd be able to work with them, set up this network, and then we'd be able to then hopefully repeat that same model in different locations that our company would be able to do and not an individual dive shop.
As far as determining how many divers go to actual dive spots around the country, that's more market research that we have to do, maybe upcoming fall class.
So there's a regulatory aspect to that path, is that you have to make it mandated that divers are going to have to use something that can be detected by this hydrophone, correct?
Well, I guess there's sort of two different aspects where it could either be regulated, we try to push so they're going to go in the water, this is something we want them to have. There's insurance companies that right now cover Dan's network, actually provides inflatable, it's called a radar sausage. So they sell these to their divers who they're also insuring. So it'd be something where we could see, not even just for government regulations, but for insurance and getting a subsidy or a cutback on what they're paying by having these devices in place. But with that third model is sort of our user uptake. If we don't have the government requirement and compliance issues of, all right, you have to have one of these before you go scuba diving, we're trying to have also the social media aspect. So for $2, for $5, you're putting this on your wrist. You can then share your experience of your vacation. So it's giving you the safety measures, it's giving you the peace of mind you're able to track when you're in the water, but then also giving them a reason to implement it themselves.
Okay, thanks.
Did you consider modifications to the design as you have it go from salmon to scuba divers? So, for example, there's different market requirements or opportunities in the scuba market. The availability of dollars that scuba divers spend on the sport could potentially allow you to modify the design to better suit that market, fit into diving watches, fit into scuba knives, etc.
For sure, there's actually another company that just within the last month or so wants to use an acoustic device that's actually embedded in a watch. And there are these other applications that are bulkier. We're trying to keep it at least with as the device as is how it's been developed. What's like an easy commercialization strategy for P&L to take the device out of salmon and actually into a commercial marketplace. But we are more than open to actually researching what the actual scuba diver market would be able to take. And are they fine with 2 grains of rice on their wrist? And then we can go from there and actually see what functions we can give them. So in case of emergency, they can send out a signal. So some of those increased, functionality and capabilities of the device.
In addition, keeping that small device, if we don't want to track people necessarily, we want to track equipment, we can attach that, keep that really small and attach it to your GoPro, attach it to a tank, attach it to your mask, items that are lost very frequently, and those can help us detect where our lost items are as well. So.
But the battery only lasts 30 to 60 days, so is this something you have to then replace every 2 months?
Yeah, like Omar said, we can change the frequency. So if we're tracking a person, we want to know within seconds of where you're at. So if we do it every second, it'll last for those 30 days. And for $5 more, you can get a new one the next time you go. You can also turn it on and off in between dives. If we're tracking equipment, maybe every 15 seconds, 30 seconds is more than enough to find your GoPro at the bottom of the ocean. So then what you do is we can actually set that and it can last them for 3 to 4 months. So that's something we'd be able to work out depending on what we're tracking is how often that signal would be going out. Because that's what's draining our batteries, how often we're sending out information.
And we want to keep that low so that they are forced to frequently keep buying our products.
Yes.
So how would you distinguish like emergency situations from somebody being excited after seeing a turtle swim by? I mean, your heart rate goes up. So how would you distinguish those two situations?
Yeah, so right now we don't have a way to actually distinguish it, but if you're actually looking for bubbles, you wouldn't be able to distinguish that either. So right now, as for the device, we're giving you able to track them, or right now it's just line of sight or a buddy system. We're giving them increased functionality and something that records it and gives that tracking. what we hope to increase and maybe do with some market research is see how to actually not just heart rate, but if let's say, oh my gosh, I just cut my leg or there's a shark attacking me, you can then actually activate the device to send this is an emergency. So there's ways where not only heart rate, but actually a physical application device. Exactly. So
Daniel David said there's a lot of ways to manipulate this device, a lot of information that he can program it to send out. So that's probably something you have to look into. So,
yeah, good question.
Ms. Rob.
I had a question about who you would think would be your customer. Would it be the boat company, the tour company, or would it be the individual diver? Who do you think is the ultimate customer for?
And I guess it would depend on the business model. For the first business model, we want to shoot for large resorts like sandals or whatnot, and the individual like boat diving excursions. That would be the primary customer. For the second customer, for the second business model where we own the hydrophones, that way we can open up to the dive shops and the resorts and then sell online to individual divers. Since we own the hydrophones, they can subscribe to us.
This isn't also restricted to the tourism industry as well. So they can also be applied to like industrial divers going down to check pipelines in deep ocean as well. So that's a whole other market segment that we didn't really go into, but it definitely would apply for them.
For the tour operators, are there insurance implications where they could get a lower rate for insuring their tours if they're using this equipment?
Absolutely, and Charlie kind of hit on that earlier as far as trying to push that regulation through or give them cutbacks as far as implementing our technology. So, do you want to go into more depth in this?
Well, I was thinking that was individually, but I think if you're running a tour company, you probably have liability for your customers. So
It depends on the policy. A lot of the companies that the insurance companies that we contacted, they're like, we just do the policy. All we do is give the policy. So they were a little hesitant to give us, if they would actually give us a discount or have policyholders provide them a discount if they were to implement this kind of device. But that's something we definitely looked into and would try and pursue further to further side it.
Really good job, guys. So just to confirm, you guys researched, you found that it's not that no one cares about trying to fish, it's just that the market's not big enough to build a business around?
Oh, no, so it's actually a market they're currently in. So the Army Corps of Engineers actually hired him to create this device just for salmon, and now they're actually pursuing other fish to put it into right now. So our recommendation we found would just be telling them a pat on the back, keep doing what you're doing if we gave them another fish to track, but they are interested, they're actually breaking into eels, lamprey, other species that are soon to be endangered or listed as endangered species, that then the government would then have a stake in wanting to track these as they travel through waterways. So they're already doing that, and so for actual commercialization or recommendation of the product, this is sort of an addition to the already business model that they've already identified successfully.
So any opportunity like aquariums or SeaWorld or?
Well, that's the thing. So it fits in a very specific niche, the device as is. So it has to be a fish of certain size or whatnot. If you start tracking bigger fishes like orcas and whatnot, they have better devices already for that. So the niche is so specific that really keeping it in the fish market, they're already saturated.
Yeah, perfect.
Yes, sir.
So, if you go with this model, what intellectual property can you patent, trademark, protect some way from competition?
As far as the patent, I think we can patent the entire the transmitter device. Obviously, we don't make the hydrophones, it would be patented by someone else. And I think we could probably trademark the scuba link system itself. Right?
Well, the name of it, but for the actual software algorithms we'd be using for the heart rate or the right now it's set for temperature for inside a fish or to track the actual temperature of water. Hopefully we can get a differential, an algorithm that's actually telling you what the diver's temperature is, and it might be a way to tell you whether your scuba diver is still swimming or you might need to go find them faster. So there's a couple things we can look into for patent or copyright for our algorithms and then our actual app for the application that they'd be using.
All right, I think we'll call it. Let's go home. Last question, Alan.
I was just going to encourage you to think about synergies between the GoPro and this system. I'm thinking about something like a visual recognition software that can identify the fish I'm looking at because it knows exactly it's or when when they're doing fish counts, knowing exactly how many fish were visible at a particular place at a particular time. Or even maybe in some of these underwater parks, even relying on the fact that you know right where you are, to give you a soundtrack that tells you what you're seeing and informs you about it. It seems to have, none of those quite sound like a killer app. It seems like there's got to be some way of combining, knowing exactly where you are and syncing that with a visual GoPro image to come up with something that's bigger than the actual.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you for all your I can have some commentary on that project. I will say that group particularly